Az yikra Yehoshua l'Ruveni v'l'Gadi v'l'Chatzi matem Menashe v'yomer alehem. Joshua then called over the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. He said to them, Atem shmartem et kol asher tziva atchem Moshe eved Hashem. You have been loyal to all that God has commanded you through Moshe. V'tishma'u v'koli l'chol asher tziviti atchem, and you have heeded my voice in all that I have commanded you. You have obeyed Moshe's commands. You have obeyed my commands. Meaning what? Specifically, what command did Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, half of Manasseh, Manasseh East, follow that was so challenging? Lo azavtem et achichem ze yamim rabim ad hayom hazeh. For 14 years at least, they have been conquering and fighting and settling in the various tribes, lands of Israel. And the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, whose portion lies east of the Yarden, has remained part of the army of Israel and fought with the rest of Israel as they promised. Ushmartem et mishmeret mitzvat Hashem Elokechem. You've kept this charge. Now God has enabled all of your brethren to be successful, to have rest from their battles. Therefore, I now allow you, I release you, I send you back to your tents, to your land, to your possession, which Moshe has given you on the other side of the Yarden. But be very diligent, take heed to follow the law that Moshe has commanded you. To love God and to walk in his ways, and to observe his commandments and to cleave to him, and to love and to serve God with all your heart and with all your soul. Be loyal to the Brit, be loyal to God. Yehoshua blessed them, and he sent them to their tents, he sent them home. And only two more psukim before we move into the kind of some observations about the story. Right, just to allocate who's where, half of Manasseh East, Moshe gave the area of the Bashan. And Yehoshua gave the rest of Manasseh territory east of the Yarden. And so Yehoshua sent them on their way. Bless them. You return to your tents with much wealth, with much cattle, with much gold and silver. Divide the spoils of the war with your brethren. All right, I'm going to leave from Pasuk Tet to on for the next part of the shir, but for now, I just want to make a couple of observations about this. So we've reached this point in the story, the end of Sefer Yehoshua, the end of the conquest, at the end of the division, in which Yehoshua has a unfinished business to attend to, namely to tell Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh that they essentially can go home. They are now free from their military service that they committed to fight with the army of Israel until the wars were over. And he's now sent them all. And there is interesting language here, which is important, that at the end, after he releases them and he says to them, you can now go home, he sort of, there's a debt, there's a commitment that they've made, that they've observed, that they've, it's kind of a closing of a circle that started in the first chapter of Yehoshua. I'll show it to you in a moment. And he enjoins them, he charges them to be very loyal to the Brit, to be very loyal to God, be very loyal to the Torah, and they're kind of moving off into a geographically separate area of the land of Israel, and so he charges them as you go home to your tents, be very careful, very diligent to guard the laws of the Torah. Two observations here. The first is the language. Az yikra Yehoshua l'Reuveni v'l'Gadi v'l'Chatzi shevet Menashe. This expression, az yikra, is unique in biblical grammar. Typically, biblical grammar uses I'm going to get a little technical here, but you'll understand why. Typical biblical grammar employs a unique grammatical verb form with a vav at the beginning of every verb that switches the tense from future to past or past to future. So, for example, yomar means, in modern Hebrew, means he will say. Vayomer means he said. Right? It flips the tense from future to past. And that's classic in throughout the book, right? Vayidaber Hashem Moshe lemor. God spoke. Vayidaber will speak. Vayidaber, he did speak. Right? The future tense to past tense, vav hahipuch, it's called in Hebrew, and that is that's pretty standard throughout Tanakh. There are a few places where Tanakh veers from that model. One we've talked about is the use of past perfect tense, something which had happened earlier, which has its own grammatical format. But for our purposes, the other is this use of the term az. Az yikra. Yikra is he will call. Az yikra, then he will call. Right? What does then he will call? Means it's another form of the same vav hipuch. Instead of using the word vav, the letter vav to reverse the tense, we have an entire word, the word az. Then this happened. Then he yikra as a way of saying this is past tense, but it's much more poetic. It's much more dramatic. It's much more lofty. If you remember, Shirat Hayam begins with the phrase, Az Yashir Moshe V'nei Yisrael. Az Yashir means, if I translate it literally, then Moshe will sing. What does it mean, will sing? So the Medrash goes to town and all kinds of midrashim about Moshe will sing forever and etc. But the pshat of it is that there are places throughout Tanakh in which the Vav HaYipuch is not employed. Rather, in its stead comes the word Az, and it typically denotes something very much more significant, dramatic. We've had it actually in Yehoshua. Also, I do believe, what do I think? Yeah, in Parak Yud, by the story of the sun standing still in Givon, if you remember the battle with the Givonim, Shemesh b'Givon Dom v'Yarech b'Emek Hayalon. We talked about that being a Shira song. That also starts with the phrase Az Yidaber Yehoshua LaHashem. Then Yehoshua, not then Moshe, then Yehoshua will speak. Then he spoke, meaning it's a past tense with the reversal context, but instead of the vav, it's this word az, which in modern Hebrew means then, but in biblical Hebrew is simply a way of reversing the tense of the verb. But it's poetic. It's shira. It's song. Right? Az yedaber Yehoshua Hashem b'yom tet Hashem etamani lifnei b'nei Yisrael v'yomer l'nei Yisrael. He said to the entire people, right? Shemesh b'givon dom v'yarech b'emek hayalon. That's right. That whole story about the sun standing still and what it meant. But there too, we have this use of the az form as a way of saying this is much more dramatic, not a simple prose, not a simple reading of the text, but something which is, you have to stop and you have to take a moment. That's a moment in which Yeshua calls Reuven for God, and it's significant because it's not just a technicality. He's not just releasing Reuven, Gad, and Menashe from their obligation. This is a circle that's being closed on all of Sefer Yehoshua. If you go back to Parak Aleph for a moment, when Yehoshua first started, go back to Parak Aleph, and the very beginning of the Sefer, God gives Yehoshua a series of instructions, and he says to him, right, this is sort of the charge to Yehoshua to take on the mantle of Moshe. And in that moment, Yehoshua charges the commanders, saying, go and prepare food for 3 days. We're going to cross the Yarden. And they're still on the east side of the Yarden. They're still in Avot Moab. They're about to cross over. This is Perak Aleph. V'lerovani, v'legadi, v'lechatzi shevet Menashe, Amar Yehoshua lemor. So Reuben, Gad, and half of Menashe, Yehoshua charged them, saying the following. This is back in Perak Aleph. Zachor et hadavar asher tziva atchem Moshe eved Hashem lemor. Remember the command that Moshe, God's servant, had commanded you, saying, God has given you rest. God has given you this land east of the Yarden. But your women, your children, your cattle all remain here in the land Moshe has given you. You will go armed before your brethren, your soldiers, and you will assist them, you will help fight the battles of the wars of Israel. Until that time in which God has given your rest of the tribes, your brethren, the same status as you, meaning the wars are over and they've settled in their lands. And they will inherit and possess their tribal territories. Then you can go back to the land of your inheritance, to the land of your territory that Moshe has given you, on the east side of the Yarden. And they responded and they said, we will do exactly as you command. So this story of Reuben and Gad and Menashe fighting with the rest of Israel until such time as the entire story is over and they can go home, that's how Yehoshua opens. That's Perak Aleph. And now we're at the very end. We finished the conquest, we finished the division, we finished the Gorel, we finished the tribal allocation. We've assigned the Levitical cities, we've assigned the city of refuge. We're done. The Yerusha part of it is now done. So now Yehoshua comes to them and he says to them, okay, let's go back. Chapter 1, chapter 22. The whole arc of Sefer Yehoshua revolves around this commitment, and it has been a commitment lemofet. It has been a commitment that to the letter. They have lived up to this obligation, an extraordinary obligation and commitment. And they have, for at least 14 years, they have remained with the army of Israel. They have fought with them. They have stood by them side by side. And now Yehoshua says, you've done everything we've asked you to do. You have been a model citizen of the tribes of Israel. Now I'm considering yourselves having fulfilled your obligation. You may now go home. And that's what he does. Interesting observation. I put this on the source page. If you look at the text that I just read with you in Perak Aleph of Yehoshua, quick look. Actually, let's do it here. A quick look at the story of Reuben and Gad appears in Chumash in many places. It starts in Bamidbar Lamed Bet, and then it's referred to several places, both in Bamidbar and in Dvarim. In Dvarim Perak Gimel, we have a short version of it. Moshe speaking to Bnei Yisrael at the very beginning of Sefer Dvarim. Vatzav etchem ba'et ahi lemor. He's talking to Reuben and Gad. On the I gave, allocated to Reuben, Gad, and Menashe this territory. And I commanded them, saying, Hashem God has given you this land to inherit. You shall go armed before the armies of Israel, the children of Israel, with them. Your women and your children, your livestock, they can all remain here. You will go and fight with the battles of Israel until God has given your brethren the same status as you. And they will also inherit the land. In other words, and this was what I wanted to show you, the psukim at the beginning of Yehoshua Perak Aleph are identical to the psukim in Dvarim Perak Gimel. They cover the same themes. They refer to the fact that God has given you this land east of the Yarden, and your women and your children and your cattle can remain here, and you will cross over the Yarden and fight with the rest of Bnei Israel. Until your brethren have received their territory. Again, all of these themes appear both in Dvarim Perek Gimel and in Yehoshua Perek Aleph. There is one word that changes. I want to highlight it for you. There is a phrase here that says, Chalutzim ta'avu lifnei achechem. This is in Dvarim Gimel. You will go before your brethren. Chalutzim. What does the word chalutzim mean? I know it translates this as armed, but I'm going to...
Pioneers.
Well, in modern Hebrew, it's a pioneer, but that's somebody who settles in a new territory. It's borrowed. That's a borrowed term. Chalutz or chalutzim means in the front. Means first. Ta'avru lifnei achechem. You will go, cross over, and fight with your brothers. In Yehoshua Perek Aleph, that phrase changes to, and I draw this connection because everything else here is exactly parallel. All four of these phrases appear in both places, but the word chalutzim gets changed to v'atem ta'avru chamushim lifnei achechem. Chamushim means, what's tachmoshet in modern Hebrew? Armed. Arms. Right? Chamushim means armed. Chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael mitzrayim. They're left with arms. They're left with tools of war. So in Dvarim Perek Gimel it says chalutzim. In Yehoshua it says chamushim. Are they synonymous? Are they the same thing? Are they different? I'll show you an example. Take a look in Yehoshua. Did I put it here? I thought I put it here. Well, let's do it here. Take a look at Yehoshua Perek Vav. This is the Battle of Yericho, the first time the army of Israel goes into war. And we studied this text, but I just want to point out something. Yehoshua calls over the Kohanim, and he tells them they're going to carry the Aron. Remember how the walls of Yericho fell? They had to surround the city 7 times, and the Kohanim were traveling, etc. And there we find the following phrase: Vayomer el ha'am ivru v'sobu et ha'ir ve'achalutz ya'avor lifnei Aron Hashem. The chalutzim will go first before the ark. He says it again in Pasuk Tet. V'hachalutz solech lifnei haKohanim tok'ei hashofar. The chalutzim went first, then the Kohanim blowing the shofar, then the rest of the people. Who were the chalutzim? Who went first in the Battle of Yericho? Doesn't say. So interestingly, Rashi makes the observation. I'll show you Rashi on this pasuk, pasuk Tet. Rashi says, Rashi, they all say the same thing. Where's Rashi? Come on. There, Rashi. Okay, we'll take Radak. Ve'achalutz, Perusho, or Pershubo, Shehem b'nei Reuven u'bnei Gad v'chatzi shevet Menashe she'avru chalutzim lifnei achechem. I put it on the source page, the quote from Rashi, Chalutz b'nei Reuven u'bnei Gad. This Chalutz of b'nei Reuven and b'nei Gad. So the Battle of Yericho, they go first. How did the Mefarshim connect the dots between this group that went first, the Chalutzim that went before the ark? It doesn't say who they are. How did Chazal connect the dots that the Chalutzim are B'nai Reuven and Gad? So I think it's from 2 places. It's from the fact that the text uses synonymously the reference to B'nai Reuven and Gad as Chamushim, armed, and as Chalutzim, Tavru. And from that point forward, they become known as the Chalutzim, the first line, the Marines, the ones who were the first lines of every battle. Reuven and Gad, they're not just at the sidelines, they're not just fighting in the ranks, but they are Chalutzim lifnei ha'am, they are first. And that's to their credit. And Yehoshua recognizes that and he acknowledges that, an extraordinary moment. And in fact, it goes all the way back to the very first reference to the story of Reuven and Gad in Bamidbar Lamed Bet, where it says that after Moshe gets angry at them, we'll talk about that text in a second, their response is, Moshe, you misunderstand us. We're not asking to stay out of the war. We're asking only to take this territory. We'll build sheep, we'll build places for our livestock, we'll build cities for our children. And we nechaletz chushim lifnei bnei Yisrael. So it's a fascinating phrase. It uses both terms. We will go first and armed. Nechaletz chushim. So there are places in Dvarim Gimel where it says chalutzim ta'avru. You will go chalutzim. In Yehoshua Perek Aleph it says chamushim avru. And essentially they are the same thing, but this text, this description of Reuven and Gad as nechaletz chushim, we will go first and we will go armed. We are not sitting in the tents, we are sitting in the front lines of the battle, and that's where we belong until such time as the rest of the battle is over, and then we can go home. So that's essentially the story of Reuven and Gad, and Moshe's charge to them, their commitment of nechaletz chushim, chalutzim ta'avun, chamushim ta'avu, we will go first, we will go armed, and in fact, that's what they described here. And so 14 years later, chapter 22, Yehoshua turns to and says, for the last 14 years, you have committed yourself limofet, ideally, in an exemplary fashion, to this
Rabbi,
commitment that you gave to Moshe, and you have stood by that commitment, and now you deserve that blessing to go home to your land. The first half of this parak is pristine. Yehoshua acknowledges all that they have done at this moment.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Moshe asked for 7 years. They by themselves.
Moshe did not ask for 7 years. Moshe said they will go until the battle is won and until the tribes have received their territory. It says so very clearly. Until
I thought that he asked for 7.
There's no
and
reference
they
to
get
years.
14.
It doesn't say anything. They don't know how many years it's going to take them to fight. It doesn't say anything about years. It says they will fight until Ad Hashianiach Hashem la'achechem kachem v'yarshu gam hem et haaretz, till the end of the possession of the land.
Thank you.
That is clear. All right. What's important to recognize is that this was exactly what Moshe was most afraid of. Moshe was most afraid of was that the tribes of Reuven and Gad were asking to sit out and not fight in the war. And that, if you go back to the story in Bamidbar Lamed Bet, when they first approach Moshe, it's the very beginning of the story, and they said, let's go back to the beginning, that they had cattle, they come to Moshe, they said, we have cattle, we have grazing land, we want to stay here, we want this land for our inheritance. We don't want to go over the Yarden, we want to stay here. Moshe's initial response, before he hears anything, before he knows, before he negotiates, before he asks them to clarify, Moshe's response to them was, how dare you? And he doesn't know who he's like, his blood is boiling just from the request. One of the most chilling lines in all of Tanakh. Your brethren will go to war and you will sit here quietly, safely, securely. Now, there's nothing safe and secure about being on the east flank of the land of Israel when you are the border city with the enemies all around you. So we'll get to that discussion next week. But nonetheless, your brethren are going to go to war to fight for the land of Canaan, and you're going to sit here. And before they have a chance to answer, he accuses them of the sin of the spies all over again. Why would you discourage the heart of Israel to go across the land? The river, that's exactly what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea in the sin of the spies, and they came back with an evil report. God was angry, and he sent them to die in the wilderness, with the exception of Caleb and Yehoshua, for 40 years. And now you have come and risen up in your father's place, a brood of sinful men. How dare you? They haven't even clarified what they want. You're going to turn away from God, and you're going to leave him in the world. God will destroy the people. So when Moshe finally finishes his tirade against them, they come to him and they said, Moshe, that's not what we had in mind. We will build cities, we will leave our cattle here, we will leave our women here, we will leave our children here. We're willing to fight. This is not about the war. We'll fight with everybody else until you release us. We will not return to our homes. From the very beginning, they said it. We won't return here until every tribe has their territory. Oh, Moshe says, oh, that's the case. We're good. Okay, Moshe. Okay, Reuben, God, we're good. We're settled. We got this. Great idea. But it's fascinating that you're sitting on what is undoubtedly one of the most sensitive, controversial issues in the story in Chumash, in that generation, and certainly in Sefer Yehoshua, the status of Reuben and Gad, and their request to stay on the east of the Yarden. Moshe misunderstands it, and he explodes at them. They respond, we will be there with everybody else. Yehoshua acknowledges that right at the very beginning of Sefer Yehoshua, in Parak Aleph, when he says that this was the commitment you made, and they said, we're there, we'll stand by that commitment. And now at the end of Sefer Yehoshua, in chapter 22, Yehoshua turns back and he says, you have remained loyal to this commitment. So much so that Chazal have a very interesting description of Reuven and Gad. The Medrash refers to Reuven and Gad as B'nai Pamalia Shel Yehoshua, Yehoshua's personal entourage, personal retinue. Yehoshua accompanied them back to their territory. They accompanied Yehoshua back to his home. There's the honor guard of Yehoshua became this unique status of Reuven and Gad. Really powerful description. And at this point, that's the everybody's applauding. Everybody's clapping. This is at least 14 years, if not maybe longer, that Reuben and Gad, that Reuben and Gad and Manasseh have remained part of the active military of Israel, the whole tribe, because they will fight with their brethren till the very end. They're part of one people who will fight with them side by side. When all the fighting is done, Yehoshua lets them go back to their land. That's part one of the story. Before I move into part two, any questions? Because now we're going to spoil the milk. So far, everything good? This is one of those moments where you kind of, and there are many in Tanakh, unfortunately, where you kind of take you take a deep breath, you sit back and you say, why can't you guys behave? Just because what happens next, Reuben and Gad leave and everything collapses.
Rabbi?
That's where we're going to go to next. Yeah, question.
At this point, were they in Shiloh?
Yes.
To get the rest.
They're in Shiloh. They're leaving from Shiloh.
So they're trying still to get the rest of the tribes.
No. The Mishkan's in Shiloh. The tribes have gone to their territory.
They've all gone. They've all dispersed and they've gone
to the extent that they can, but right, the extent that they can. There are places that they've conquered more or less, but we've gone through from Shiloh is in chapter 18, And then we had in chapter 18, we had Binyamin, and then we had in chapter 19, we have the rest of the Gorals and Shimon and all the tribes. Everything's been allocated. Then we have the Arei Miklat in chapter 20 and the Arei Leviim in chapter 21. Everything's allocated. We're done. There's nothing left to allocate. There's some battles to be fought, still skirmishes here and there, but essentially the Goral is done, the tribal divisions have done, the conquest of the land is done. We are as done as Yehoshua is going to be, because now Yehoshua is going to, next 2 chapters, Yeshua's life is going to end. He's going to give his final speech, and then Shoftim begins. As done as Yehoshua can be, this is where we're at. And it's interesting that when he lets them go, he kind of has to throw in a reminder to them to be loyal to the Torah. Unclear why he needs to do this. But be careful, be diligent to obey the law, to love God and to walk in his ways and to guard his commandments and to cleave to him. We'll have to read like Kriyat Shema, right? Read like Psukim and Dvarim. Extraordinary. There are several possibilities as to why Yehoshua feels it necessary to add this on, right? He's praising them on the one hand for being loyal to a commitment they made 20 years ago, and then he's telling them, but be careful about observing the mitzvot of the Torah. So one theory is that it has to do with the next chapter. In chapter 23 and in 24, Yehoshua is going to gather all the tribes of Israel on the mountain of Shechem for a final speech to the people. It's not clear that Reuven and Gad and Manasseh are part of that gathering because it's in Shechem and he's now just sent them all home. So it's possible that that's sort of a private version, small version of what he's then going to do on Shechem, and Har Gerizim and Har Evo with the rest of the tribes. That's a one possibility. It's just that it's a way of kind of a very biblical way of saying, you till now you've been good, can keep it up. That kind of thing. Yehoshua blesses them and he sends them on their way. Menashe in the Bashan, Reuven and Gad in the lower Gilad, and in the area of Sichon and Og. All right. Now we turn to Pasuk Tet. Now from Pasuk Tet to the end of the Perek is one story, is a postscript, is a second half of this story of Reuven and Gad. It's a long story, and it's a very important one. So I'm not 100% sure we'll finish it today. If we don't finish it today, we'll finish it next week. But I want to read it through carefully and slowly, and then analyze it. So you'll that's where we're at. Everybody with me? Vayashuvu, vayachu b'nei Reuven u'bnei Gad v'chatzi shevet haMenashe me'et b'nei Yisrael mishilo sheberetz Canaan. So the Reuven, Gad, half Menashe left b'nei Yisrael at Shiloh, meaning that's where this conversation was happening, which is in the land of Canaan. Lalechet el eretz hagilad, el eretz achuzatam asher nachazuba, to go back to their land, the land of the Gilad, the land of their inheritance that they have taken as possession. Al pi Hashem biyad Moshe. Even that expression is very powerful. And Al pi Hashem biyad Moshe, by God's command in the hands of Moses. Vayavo el Galilot hayarden. They come to the Galilot hayarden, the region around the Jordan. Asher be'eretz Canaan. Vayivnu b'nei Reuven u'bnei Gad v'chatzi shevet haMenashe sham mizbeach al hayarden mizbeach gadol lemar'eh. They built on the edge of the Jordan River a giant altar. Mar'eh gadol, mizbeach gadol lemar'eh. Great, big, large altar. Larger than the original. They built an enormous altar that could be seen from miles away. Ve'yishmu b'nei Yisrael lemor. The rest of b'nei Yisrael, referring to the tribes, we're going to call them the western tribes and the eastern tribes, just for lack of a better term. Well, the western tribes of b'nei Yisrael heard. Hinei banu b'nei Ruven u'b'nei Gad v'chatzi shevet ha'Menashe et ha'mizbeach. Whoa! Behold, Reuven, Gad, half of Menashe, they built an altar. El Mul Eretz Canaan. Now, El Mul Eretz Canaan is a subject of discussion. What does El Mul Eretz Canaan mean? Where did they build this altar? In front of Eretz Canaan, facing Eretz Canaan, in Eretz Canaan. There's a machloket in the Mefarshim whether they built it on the east side of the Yarden, facing the land of Canaan, or they built it on the west side of the Yarden just before they crossed over. That's a big machloket in the Mefarshim. We can interpret the story the same way either way. It just, I think it makes more sense if the Mizbeach was built on the west side of the Yarden, but we can work it through either way. El Glilot HaYarden, El Ever B'nei Yisrael. They built this altar in the region around the Jordan, on the side, El Ever, on the Israelite side, on the west side, according to the way these Mefarshim read the text. They heard, they saw. Vayishmu B'nei Yisrael. B'nei Yisrael heard. Now, what's the problem here? What's the issue here? Somebody, just before we even get to what happens next, I'm covering it up. Right, what's the problem? They heard. They built the Mizbeach. B'nai Yisrael heard they built the Mizbeach. And they went ballistic. What's the issue?
They shouldn't be building
it. They built one.
They shouldn't build a Mizbeach. We only have one Mizbeach. Where is it?
Shiloh.
Not allowed to build an alternate Mizbeach. It's called a Bama. It's called a private altar. So once you have a Mishkan, once you have a Mizbeach, you have a Mikdash, not allowed to build private altars. What are Reuven and Gad doing building an altar? Now, what are the possibilities here? Why did they do it? I'm stopping here for a reason. I want to go to the next word. But what are the possibilities? You are the council of the leadership council of the tribes of Israel on the west side of the Yarden. You heard what Reuben, Gad, and Menashe built a giant altar on the edge of the Jordan River. What are the theories going through your head?
Challenging the authorities, setting themselves up.
Okay, it's challenging the authorities, setting themselves up. In other words, you see it as treasonous.
They're building their own Mishkan, so they won't have to go to Shiloh. So there's
religious treason, political treason. They're setting themselves up. They're building their own Mishkan. Okay, yeah, you're all thinking like the tribes of Israel. Very good.
My opinion, it's a gal ed. It's actually the opposite. It's a connection.
Okay, so now I have a debate going on. You think it's a monument, they think it's an altar. Is it a monument or is it an altar? What do you think? What signs might there be to tell me whether they're building a monument or an altar to build a new temple? What indications might I have?
The size.
Size, number one. It's much bigger than a normal Mizbeach. Mizbeach gadol l'mar'eh, which is weird. Why would you build such a big altar?
What it looks like.
Right? It looks like the altar. There's only one altar. It looks exactly like the altar in Shiloh. Right? What else might indicate an answer to the question, are they being treasonous or are they being loyal? Right? They want to.
Rabbi, you mentioned before that they were one of the most loyalist people to Yehoshua.
There's a little bit of history here. It's a little bit of precedent. Look at the beginning of the parak. Look how loyal they've been. Look how good they've been. Look what they've done for 14 years. You're going to jump to the conclusion right away that they're building something which is treasonous, rather maybe giving the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they want to build. Right? Also, look at where this thing is. Where is this altar? Assuming for a moment, and that's part of the machloket, but most Mefarshim agree that Amul Eretz Canaan means they built it on the west side of the Jordan River. Why would they build a temple on the west side of the Jordan if they're on the east side? That also reflects some sort of, right, not a functional mizbeach, but a mar'eh. So is there enough evidence to give them some benefit of the doubt? It's either they're being treasonous, in which case, okay, we know what to do with treason, or they're some other motivation. How do we resolve the question? What do you do?
You confront them and you ask them. You confront them and you ask them. That's what they did.
Walk up. Wait a second. What they did is not what you just described. Hang on a second. We'll get to what they did. I stopped for a second. What would you do? You're the council of the 12 of the 9.5 tribes. You say you see what's going on. You don't know what their motivation is. What do you normally do?
The representative to ask them.
You go take a representative and go ask them. Great. Who are you going to send? Remember, the goal is to find out what they did so that we can resolve this amicably. Who do you send?
From the other half of Menashe?
Right? Or anybody else. Let's put it this way. Who's the one person you don't want to send? You don't want to send somebody who's trigger happy. You want to send a diplomat with the skills of diplomacy, not somebody who is trigger happy. Agreed? Okay. Who's the most trigger happy leader in the people of Israel at this moment in time?
Pinchas.
Pinchas. All right. Now let's read the rest of the story. Vayishmu b'nei Yisrael. B'nei Yisrael heard. Vayikalu kol adat b'nei Yisrael Shiloh. They gathered together all the children of Israel in Shiloh. La'alot alehem latzavah. To go to war against the treasonous tribes, Reuben, Gad, and Menashe. Vayishlechu b'nei Yisrael el b'nei Reuben ve'el b'nei Gad ve'el chatzi shevet Menashe eretz HaGilad. They sent a delegation. Who did they send? Pinchas ben Elazar HaKohen. Anybody's ever any question about how this is going to end? We've just they go armed to the teeth to go to war against Reuben and Gad, and they send Pinchas together with 10 tribe leaders. Nasi echad levitat, one for each tribe. L'chol matot b'nei Yisrael. Leaders of the tribes of Israel, and the whole delegation, the tribes, the leaders, and the heads, and Reuven and Pinchas. They come to Reuven and Gad, and they knock on the door, open the door, they come in, and here's their speech. Now, remember when they first approached Moshe? I showed you the text. When they first approached Moshe, they made a simple request. What was Moshe's response? He totally misread them. He totally misunderstood them, and he exploded at them. These poor guys, Reuven and Gad, they can't get a break. Everybody misunderstands. Everybody assumes their motivation and then yells at them. Pinchas' speech starts with the declaration of war. Kamru kol adat Hashem. This is what the congregation of God has spoken. What is this treachery, trespass that you have committed against the God of Israel, Melokei Yisrael? You have not even you've just stepped home. You haven't even taken your coat off. To rebel against God. To build an altar, to rebel against God. And then Pinchas says, and this only Pinchas can do this, because Pinchas is directly involved. What? We haven't even recovered from the iniquity of the story of Baal Peor, which was the story of Pinchas and Cosby Batsur and spearing him, etc., and the Magefa that killed 30,000. And you are now going to turn away from God? Today you're going to rebel. Umachar, you'll ask me why I care. I care because we're one people. Today you commit a treason. Tomorrow God gets angry at us. We're going to pay the price. Pinchas goes on. He's not finished. If maybe you think that your land is too impure, too unclean, what would give Pinchas the impression that Reuben and Gad are motivated by the fact that their land is too impure? Right? Because, again, assuming they built the Mizbeach on the west side of the Yarden, you have to ask yourself, why didn't they build it on the east side? So it could be that he's assuming, because he's making a lot of assumptions here, right? He's assuming that they didn't build it on the east side because the east side is outside of the land of Canaan, and so it's tameh, it's impure. So they built it on the land that at least has the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. So he says to them, if that's true, even tmei Eretz achuzatchem, so ivu lachem al Eretz achuzat Hashem. So then why don't you just pick yourselves up and come back and live in the land which is the land of God? You're living outside the land of God. You're living in the land of barbarians. You're living in the land of Eretz Tumah. You're living in the land of Chutz La'aretz. You're living on the other side of the Yarden. You want to live in the land with Kedusha, come back and join the rest of us. Asher Shechan Sham Mishkan Hashem. That's the land in which the Mishkan is, in Shiloh. Ve'achazu b'tochenu, and bring an inheritance amongst them. Take an inheritance in our land. But don't sit here on the other side of the Yarden and build yourself a Mizbeach, u'v'Hashem al timrodu, and don't rebel against God. V'otanu al timrodu. Do not rebel against us. V'yivnotachem lechem Mizbeach, Mizbach Hashem Elokeinu, to build an alternate altar. There's an interesting phrase for you. Mizbeach mibaladeh Mizbach Hashem is an alternate altar to the altar in Shiloh. And if Baal Peor wasn't enough of an iniquity to compare it to, Halo Achan ben Zerach. Remember the story of Achan? Whoa, back in the beginning of Yehoshua, took the cherem of Yericho, and everybody suffered in the battle of Ai. Achan ben Zerach mal b'cherem. Achan took one trespass. He took a little bit of the cherem of Yericho. And there was a terrible wrath that fell against all of Israel. He was one person. Look at that, no. Did not perish alone. And you are all tribe going to commit a trespass. That's how it started. He compares it to the Ma'al of Achan. You kind of get this moment. You get this sense that Reuven and Gad are sitting there in their council chambers, and in walks Pinchas with his delegation and their spears and their guns blazing, and he says his whole speech. Reuven and Gad is sitting there waiting for it all to finish, and for Pinchas to calm down and to take a breath and to finish his tirade. And when he's all done, Reuven, Gad, and Manasseh answered and spoke to the heads of the tribes of Israel. I don't know if this is in the Mefarshim, I haven't seen this, but it's interesting that they speak to Rashi Alfei Yisrael. Who's been speaking up until now? Pinchas, right? Pinchas, Vasavan Nisiim, Rashi Bnei Yisrael. I'm not sure they bypassed Pinchas. I'm not sure that they kind of even wanted to respond to Pinchas. And they answered, and they said, Elohim Hashem, God of God, all God, right? God of Shem Elohim, knows. And he said it twice as a language of an oath. Yodea, Yisrael Yodea, and the rest of Israel knows. If we did this as an act of rebellion or treachery, then don't save us this day. What are you accusing us of treachery for? What are you accusing us of treason for? We built an altar to turn away from God. We haven't, the altar is pristine. We haven't brought a single sacrifice on it. We didn't build it for sacrifices. If we build an altar as a place of worship, God will punish us. We accept that. That's not why we built this thing. Ask us why we built it. I'll tell you. We built it for a simple reason. We built it for a simple reason. What's the reason? Machar yomru v'nechem levanenu lemor ma'alachem v'lashem elokei Yisrael. Because tomorrow and the day after, a generation from now, we're sitting here on the other side of the Jordan. Your children and grandchildren are going to say to our children and our grandchildren that we are not part of the nation of Israel and that we have no share in the God of Israel. Because Gvul Natan Hashem Benenu Venechem, God put a border between us called the Jordan River. And therefore, Bnei Reuven, Bnei Gad, Ve'en lachem chelek b'Hashem, and as if to say, you, Reuven and Gad, on the other side of the Jordan, you're not part of the Jewish people. You're not real Jews. You're not part of us. You have no part in the story of the land of God of Israel. And eventually, your children will actually go to war against our children, and they will destroy us, accusing us of not fearing God. So we decided to do something to demonstrate that we are part of the children of Israel. We're part of one nation. V'nomer, naseh lanu livnot et hamizbeach. Let's build a replica of the altar of Shiloh. Lo olav lo lazavach, not to bring sacrifices, but rather ki edu beinenu v'nechem, as a testimony, as a witness between us, as a monument. Uvendorteinu acharenu. That what? La'avodat Hashem lefanav, that we want to serve God, we go to Shiloh. Bolotenu v'izvachenu v'ishlamenu. We've been to Shiloh. We know what Shiloh looks like. We know what the altar in Shiloh looks like. We build a replica of it, and it's a pointer. It's a deck. It's an arrow. It says to the Mizbeach, you go this way, and you cross the Jordan, and you follow it up to Shiloh. V'lo yomru v'nechem machar levenenu. Your children shouldn't say to our children tomorrow, you have no portion in God. So it shall be when in tomorrow and the day after, when your children will say to our children and say, we have no share in the God of Israel, we will say, look at the pattern, look at the model of the altar of God that we built, not for sacrifices, but as a testimony for us to be part of the children of Israel. Far be it from us, God forbid, that we should rebel against God. We're the most loyal tribes in all of Israel. That we should build an altar for sacrifices. Alternate to the besides the one that's in Shiloh. You got it all wrong. That's interesting. Is there assumption? Let me ask another question. Reuven and Gad, is there assumption that the rest of the tribes of Israel are going to jump to the conclusion that the tribes of Israel east of the Jordan are not part of the rest of the tribes of Israel, not part of the same nation? And is that a realistic assumption? That that's going to be the climate here, that the tribes of Israel in the future are going to assume that the tribes east of the Jordan are not really part of the Jewish people? I would have to say, I think it is. I think their concern is very real, because that's exactly what Pinchas said to them. They hadn't even opened their mouths, and Pinchas accused them of being second class. When Pinchas said to them, if the land in which you are living is impure, then cross over to the land where God is, to the real land of Israel, to the real spiritual, to the real Eretz HaKadosha, to the land of Sheshachan Sham Mishkan Hashem. Right? They haven't even opened their mouths and they made that accusation. So there's a real concern here. But for now, Vayishma Pinchas HaKohen, Nesiei HaIdah, Rashei Alfei Yisrael Asher Ito, Pinchas and the Nesiim and the heads of the tribes heard et advarim asher dibru b'nei Reuven u'bnei Gad u'bnei Menashe. They heard all this. They heard the whole speech. They said, "Okay, I buy that. I'll accept that." I really once wished he would have apologized. I really wished Pinchas would have said, I'm sorry, but he didn't. It's not in his lexicon. What he said was, Hayom Yadanu, Kibetochenu Hashem. We know today that God is in our midst. Because today we learned that you have not committed this treachery. And now, God, you have delivered Israel from the hands, you have delivered the children of Israel out of the hands of Hashem, meaning you have saved us from a civil war. That's what he says. Okay, I'll buy it. We have averted civil war. Everybody, we can go home. So they turned around, left Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, went back to Eretz Canaan, went back to Bnei Israel, and reported, no, not a trespass. They liked it, they accepted it, they blessed God. And conclusion, so they agreed not to go to war against them and not to have a civil war and not to l'shachet et ha'aretz asher b'nei Reuven and b'nei Gad yoshveim sham, and they will not destroy the land of Reuven, Gad, and Manasseh and not wipe Reuven, Gad, Manasseh off the map. And they called this Mizbech a witness that God is amongst us. The irony of this last pasuk, right? So it all concludes that, okay, we averted civil war. You only averted civil war because you made an assumption that was erroneous. Then you went to wipe out Reuben and Gad on the basis of an assumption which was not based on fact. And then you discovered that your assumptions were wrong and that you never needed to go to war in the first place. So you turned around and went home and a civil war was averted. It's extraordinary. And this is Reuben and Gad, who have been loyal, who's fought by them side by side for the last 14 years at least. And I read this parak, I almost cry every time I read this parak. It's extraordinary. Pinchas, what would it have taken you to say, to recognize that you ran off the, I don't even know what to say. Zealots, a zealot. Pinchas was a kana. Your kanas is so evident here. And it ends with, okay, they averted civil war. By the way, they averted civil war for now. For now. Next week, we'll see how long that averting civil war lasted. They managed to avert civil war for now. It won't take long before civil war will erupt. And it'll erupt over the Jordan River. And that's exactly the chashash that Reuben and Gad had. That this border would be perceived as if it's bad enough the tribes perceive themselves as independent nations separate from each other. Now there's a border between the tribes east and the tribes west. The tribes west are called Bnei Israel, and the tribes east are called Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. You can just see the tension that is building that will eventually translate into the book of Shoftim. So it's a very powerful and very important segue into what happens in Sefer Shoftim. That Bezrat Hashem we will explore in part 2, which is next week. So I'm going to stop sharing and take a moment to answer any questions.
I noticed that the word az appears in Pinchas's words. Az, perhaps alluding to the az that you drew our attention to at the beginning.
Where does Pinchas say az? Jeez. I'm looking for, what reference are you referring to?
I don't have the text in front of me, but
I'm not seeing it. Where are you seeing Pinchas use the word as?
At the beginning, where he said, instead of Vayomer or Vayadaber, he said Az.
We're here at the top. Az Yikra Yehoshua?
Yeah, Az Yikra.
Yeah, that's not Pinchas. That's the text. That's the narrative. That's the description of Yehoshua letting Reuben and God free, letting them from their obligation and acknowledging that they fulfilled their obligation. There I expect it. That's very poetic. It's very powerful. Where else do you see it?
As Hitzaltem.
Interesting. Except that it doesn't have the
In verse
role of
31.
reversal there. It's actually in its normal preposition form. Okay, maybe. But it's there it's actually in its normal preposition form, not in the poetic reversal role that it has earlier. Okay.
I might be jumping the gun, but the only time Bnei Yisrael seem to work together is when they're attacking each other.
Yeah, that's a sad statement. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I'm not sure that's true, but
okay. I hope you prove it wrong.
See you
Thank
later.
you very much.
a lot has to do with leadership. A lot has to do with leadership. Part of the messaging, and I'll give you the punchline already for Sefer Shoftim. The part of the messaging of Sefer Shoftim is the need for a national leadership, not tribal. What we call a melech in Tanakh terms is a national leader, not a tribal leader. And the entire book of Shoftim leads to this conclusion that this tribal division and tribal leadership, called the Nasi, called the Shofet, however you want to define it, leads to the division of the tribes and therefore the conflict between them, rather than seeing themselves as one banner, one flag, one nation. For that you need a melech. For that you need a national identifiable leader of all the tribes, not just of one tribe. And so the struggle to go from Yehoshua to you can't get to Malachim until you get to, or you can't get to even to Shmuel, Shaul and David, before you go through the process of kind of recognizing that this model of tribal divisions doesn't work. So that's the whole agenda of Sefer Shoftim.
Is that because Yehuda doesn't step up?
No, it's got nothing to do with stepping up. It has to do with nature of leadership, or nature of government. What kind of leadership are we anticipating? Does each tribe have its own leader? It's the same conflict the United States went through in between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution.
Yes.
Exactly the same issue. Right?
Yeah.
Are you individual
transition.
tribes / states, or are you one nation? That's at the core of anytime you bring groups together under one leadership. Where is the center of power? Is it the tribe or at the leader? Right? Yeah, exactly.
The transition is very difficult.
Yeah. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Right. My pleasure.
Very much.
Thank you.
See you next
Happy
week.
post Hanukkah.
Thank you.
Thank you. You
Good
too.
night. Thank you.